On May 4, 1992, just south of Kansas City, Missouri, a tense scene unfolded at a landfill. 6 federal agents closed in on a pickup truck driven by a man who called himself Richard Fowler. But there was no Richard Fowler behind the wheel. Sat Kenneth Allen McDuff, a man whose name would become synonymous with terror in Texas. McDuff, a convicted triple murderer, had managed to slip through the cracks of the justice system, and was now finally being brought to justice after a killing spree that spanned 26 years. As the handcuffs snapped shut, the nightmare he had created was finally over, but the question that would haunt everyone involved remained. How did a man sentenced to death for the brutal murder of 3 teenagers in 1966 end up free to kill again, claiming at least 6 more innocent lives? This is the chilling story of Kenneth McDuff, the only person in Texas history to be sentenced to death, released on parole, and then sentenced to death once more. His case would reveal the fatal flaws in America's justice system and leave countless families shattered forever. Before we dive deeper into this harrowing case, if you're passionate about true crime stories that not only explore the crimes themselves, but also the systemic failures that allow them to happen, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. Your support helps us continue to bring you these in-depth investigations. Let's go. Back to March 21, 1946. In Rosebud, Texas, Kenneth Allen McDuff was born into what seemed like a typical American family. His father, John Allen McDuff, owned a thriving concrete business during Texas's construction boom, while his mother, Addie McDuff, was a well-known local figure, fiercely protective of her 6 children. But beneath the surface of this seemingly ordinary family, something dark was brewing. Kenneth was the 5th of 6 siblings, growing up on Linen Street in the small town of Rosebud. From the start, his mother gave him special treatment, perhaps too much. Addie earned the nickname Pistol-Packing Mama after she once threatened a school bus driver with a gun for kicking Kenneth's twin brother, Lonnie, off the bus. This wasn't just a case of a protective mother, it was enabling at its worst. Addie would go to any lengths to shield her children from consequences, never holding them accountable for their actions. For Kenneth, this meant growing up with the belief that rules simply didn't apply to him. At Rosebud High School, Kenneth quickly gained a reputation as a bully. But he wasn't reckless, he picked on those he knew wouldn't fight back. When he made the mistake of picking a fight with Tommy Sedman, a popular athlete, Kenneth was beaten badly and his reputation suffered. Instead of learning from this, Kenneth simply became more careful, choosing his victims with even more caution, always making sure he had the upper hand. This pattern preying on the vulnerable would define his entire life. Unable to handle the fallout from his defeat, Kenneth dropped out of high school and joined his father's concrete business. Even there, he couldn't resist boasting, making himself out to be more important than he was. He would brag about mowing lawns for elderly women, claiming it made other workers jealous of his popularity. But manual labor wasn't enough for Kenneth's ego. He craved easy money and excitement. By 1964, at just 18 years old, Kenneth was convicted of 12 counts of burglary and attempted burglary across 3 Texas counties. Bell, Milam, and Falls. The court sentenced him to 12 4-year prison terms, but they were to be served at the same time. What could have been 48 years behind bars was reduced to just 4, thanks to legal technicalities. Instead of seeing this as a wake-up call, Kenneth saw it as proof that the system was weak. He was paroled in December 1965, serving less than 2 years of his sentence. Within months, he was back in prison for fighting, but again, he was released quickly. Even while serving time for burglary, Kenneth's criminal behavior was escalating. His future accomplice, Roy Dale Green, would later testify that McDuff openly bragged about his criminal record during this period. Even more disturbing, Green claimed that Kenneth boasted about raping and killing 2 young women, crimes never officially linked to him, but which hinted at a terrifying pattern. By 1966, Kenneth McDuff was 20 years old, angry, and looking for bigger thrills than burglary could provide. He had learned that the justice system would keep giving him chances, and that his mother would always defend him. Most dangerously, he had discovered that he enjoyed having power over people who couldn't fight back. August 6, 1966, began like any other hot summer day in central Texas. Kenneth McDuff and Roy Dale Green spent the day working for McDuff's father, pouring concrete under the relentless sun. Green was a new acquaintance, someone Kenneth had only known for about a month through a mutual friend. As dusk settled, Kenneth made a chilling announcement: he wanted to find a girl. The 2 men got into McDuff's car and started cruising the area, searching for someone to target. Kenneth was clearly the dominant force in this partnership. and Green, younger and icily intimidated, simply went along with whatever Kenneth wanted. By 10 p.m., their aimless drive brought them to a baseball field in Everman, Texas. There, they spotted three teenagers: 17-year-old Robert Brand, his 16-year-old girlfriend Edna Louise Sullivan, and Robert's 15-year-old cousin Mark Dunham. The teens were just enjoying a summer night together. Robert and Edna were high school sweethearts, and Mark was visiting, excited to spend time with his cousin. None of them could have imagined that their ordinary evening would soon become a nightmare that would haunt Texas for decades. McDuff parked his car about 150 yards away and watched the teens, sizing them up like a predator. He saw exactly what he wanted: three young people who would be no match for two grown men with weapons. Pulling out his .38 Colt revolver, McDuff approached the group. The sight of the gun instantly turned a peaceful night into a scene of terror. He ordered all three teenagers into the trunk of Robert's car. Imagine the fear they must have felt. One moment they were laughing and making plans. The next they were staring down the barrel of a gun, their lives in the hands of a stranger with evil intentions. With Green following in McDuff's car, McDuff drove the teenagers forward along the highway and into a remote field. Once there, he ordered Edna out of the trunk and into the trunk of his own Dodge Coronet. According to Green's later testimony, it was at this moment that McDuff revealed his true intentions. He told Green they would have to knock him off, meaning they would have to kill the teens. Robert and Mark remained trapped in the trunk of their car, likely able to hear everything happening outside, fully aware of the danger they were in. In their final moments, they pleaded for their lives, begging McDuff not to kill them. But McDuff was unmoved. He fired 6 shots into the trunk, killing both boys, one who had just been on a date with his girlfriend, the other simply visiting family. But McDuff wasn't finished. He told Green to wipe their fingerprints off the Ford, then drove to another location with Edna still alive in the trunk. What happened next was even more horrifying. Both McDuff and Green, with Green later claiming he acted out of fear, repeatedly assaulted the terrified 16-year-old girl. Edna begged for her life, pleading to be let go, desperate to return home to her family. When they were done, McDuff asked Green for something to strangle her with. Green handed over his belt, but McDuff chose a different method: a 3-foot-long broomstick from his car. He used it to strangle Edna with such force that it broke her neck. Then, as if she were nothing, they dumped her body in the bushes. After murdering 3 innocent teenagers, McDuff and Green stopped at a gas station in Hillsborough and bought sodas. They drove to Green's house and spent the night as if nothing had happened. The casualness of their actions after such brutality showed just how little empathy Kenneth McDuff possessed. The next day, McDuff buried his revolver beside Green's garage. Their mutual friend, Richard Boyd, let McDuff wash his car at his house, helping to destroy evidence of the murders. But Green couldn't live with the guilt. Overwhelmed by horror at what he had done, he confessed to Boyd's parents the following day. They immediately told Green's mother, who convinced her son to turn himself in. McDuff was arrested by Falls County Sheriff Albert Brady Pamplin and Deputy U.S. Marshal Thomas Parnell McNamara Sr. The investigation moved quickly, and the evidence was overwhelming. The trial for the murders of Robert Brand, Mark Dunham, and Edna Sullivan shocked the entire state. The brutality of the crimes, especially the assault and murder of 16-year-old Edna, horrified everyone who heard the details. McDuff was sentenced to death in Texas's electric chair. Green, who testified against McDuff and was seen as a more reluctant participant, received a 25-year sentence and was released in 1979. Justice seemed to have been served. Kenneth McDuff would pay the ultimate price for his crimes, and Texas could rest easy, believing he would never kill again. But fate had other plans. In 1972, the U.S. Supreme Court made a landmark decision in the case of Furman v. Georgia, ruling that the way the death penalty was being administered in the United States violated the Constitution's 8th and 14th Amendments. This decision led to the overturning of capital convictions across the country, including Kenneth McDuff's death sentence was commuted to life in prison, and suddenly, a man who had brutally murdered 3 teenagers was no longer facing execution. Instead, he would serve life with the possibility of parole. McDuff wasted no time trying to manipulate the system. He hired a lawyer who put together what looked like a convincing case for his innocence, even going so far as to claim that Roy Dale Green was the real killer and that McDuff had been wrongly convicted. Some members of the parole board were actually swayed by this fabricated evidence. During a one-on-one interview with a board member, McDuff even attempted to bribe him for a favorable parole decision. He was caught and given a 2-year sentence for the bribery attempt. You'd think that trying to bribe your way out of prison for triple murder would end any hope of parole, but that wasn't the case. Despite the bribery conviction, some parole board members still believed McDuff could be rehabilitated and contribute to society. This decision would become one of the most disastrous failures in the history of the American justice system. By the late 1980s, Texas prisons were dangerously overcrowded. The parole board was under orders to release 150 prisoners a day to bring the prison population down to the 50,000 for which there was space. The pressure to reduce numbers created a perfect storm, and it would soon have deadly consequences. Despite his 1982 conviction for attempted bribery, McDuff was granted parole in early October 1989. Kenneth McDuff was one of 20 former death row inmates and 127 murderers released during this period of overcrowding. Just think about that. A man who had murdered 3 teenagers, including sexually assaulting and strangling a 16-year-old girl, was set free because there wasn't enough room in prison. The families of Robert Brand, Mark Dunham, and Edna Sullivan weren't even notified of his release. They had no idea that the man who had taken their loved ones was back on the streets, after serving 23 years for triple murder. Kenneth McDuff walked out of prison a free man on October 11, 1989. He was 43 years old. Filled with anger at the world for punishing him, McDuff found work at a gas station, earning $4 an hour, and took classes at Texas State Technical College in Waco. To those who didn't know his past, he might have seemed like someone trying to rebuild his life, but McDuff hadn't changed. The only thing he'd learned in prison was how to better manipulate the system. Within days of his release, investigators believe McDuff began killing again. On October 14, 1989, just 3 days after he left prison, the body of 29-year-old Seraphia Parker was found in Temple, Texas, about 48 miles south of Waco along the I-35 corridor. She had been beaten, strangled, and dumped in a field. McDuff was never charged with Parker's murder, but the timing and location matched his movements perfectly. If he was responsible, it means he lasted only 3 days before killing again. McDuff's parole was briefly revoked when he made death threats against an African-American youth in Rosebud, sending him back to prison for a parole violation. But this setback didn't last long. His mother, Addie, still enabling him after all these years, paid $1,500 plus another $700 in expenses to 2 attorneys to review her son's chances for release. On December 18, 1990, Kenneth McDuff was released from prison for the second time. The killing spree that followed would terrify Texas and reveal the deadly consequences of a broken parole system. On the night of October 10, 1991, McDuff picked up a sex worker named Brenda Thompson in Waco. He tied her up and was driving with her in his truck when he approached a police checkpoint. Realizing this might be her only chance to escape, Brenda began kicking at the windshield, trying desperately to get the officer's attention. She managed to crack the glass several times, but McDuff responded by speeding directly at the police. 3 officers had to jump out of the way to avoid being hit. McDuff then led police on a wild chase, turning off his lights and driving the wrong way down one-way streets until he finally escaped. He parked his truck in a wooded area near US Route 84 and tortured Brenda Thompson to death. Her body wouldn't be found until 1998. Thompson came heartbreakingly close to being saved that night. If she had managed to break through the windshield just a little sooner, or if the officers had noticed her distress, she might have survived. Instead, she became another victim of McDuff's violence and the system's inability to keep him behind bars. Just 5 days later, on October 15, 1991, McDuff was seen with 21-year-old sex worker Regina Dion Moore at a Waco motel. Witnesses saw them arguing before they left together in McDuff's pickup truck, heading toward a remote area beside Texas State Highway 6 there. McDuff tied Moore's arms and legs with stockings and killed her. Her body would not be discovered until September 29, 1998. 7 years after she disappeared, McDuff is also believed to have murdered 23-year-old Cynthia Renee Gonzalez. Her body was found in a creek bed near County Road 313 on September 21, 1991, 6 days after she was reported missing from Arlington. Although McDuff was never charged with her murder, the circumstances and timing fit his pattern. But McDuff's most infamous crime after his release was still to come. On December 29, 1991, in Austin, Texas, 28-year-old Colleen Reed, a Louisiana native, was washing her car at a local car wash. McDuff, accompanied by an accomplice named Alva Hank Wally, spotted her. Without hesitation, McDuff told Wally he was going to kidnap her. In broad daylight with witnesses nearby, McDuff pulled into the car wash, parked behind Reed's Bay, and grabbed her by the throat, dragging her into the back seat of Wally's car. The abduction happened so quickly and brazenly that no one could intervene. With Wally driving and McDuff in the back with Colleen, they drove around Austin. McDuff tied her hands with shoelaces and began torturing her with cigarettes, sexually assaulting her as she screamed for help. According to Wally's later testimony, Colleen's screams were so loud they hurt his ears. When investigators asked Wally why he didn't try to help her, even as she begged for mercy, he claimed he was too afraid of McDuff to intervene. McDuff directed Wally to a field about 200 to 300 yards from his parents' home in Bell County. There McDuff dragged Colleen out of the car and struck her in the face with such force that Wally described the sound as like a tree branch snapping. Colleen went limp from the blow. McDuff then put her in the trunk and drove Wally back to his apartment. That was the last time Wally saw either McDuff or Colleen Reed. Wally later told investigators he believed McDuff had murdered and buried Colleen somewhere in Bell County. On February 24, 1992, another tragedy unfolded. Valencia Hoswa, a 22-year-old sex worker and fellow student at Texas State Technical College, was last seen alive knocking on McDuff's door. He strangled her to death, and her body was found on March 15 at a golf course near the college. McDuff's final victim would be the one that finally led to his capture. Melissa Northrup was a 22-year-old store clerk at a Waco Quick-Pack convenience store. She was pregnant with her third child when she vanished from the store on March 1, 1992. The kidnapper also stole $250 from the cash register. McDuff quickly became a suspect because he had been seen near the store around the time Melissa disappeared. Even before her body was found, a college friend of McDuff's told police that McDuff had tried to recruit him to help rob the store. On April 26, 1992, a fisherman discovered Melissa Northrup's body in a Dallas County gravel pit. Her hands were still tied behind her back, and she had been strangled with a rope. Melissa was pregnant when she was murdered. McDuff didn't just take her life, but also the life of her unborn child, devastating a family that was preparing to welcome a new baby. The investigation into McDuff's post-release murders was complicated by the fact that his victims were scattered across several Texas counties. This made it difficult for law enforcement agencies to coordinate, allowing McDuff to evade capture for months. However, police discovered that McDuff was involved in drug dealing and possessed an illegal firearm, both federal offenses. On March 6, 1992, a local state attorney issued a warrant for his arrest. In April 1992, Bell County investigators brought in Hank Wally for questioning, knowing he was closely associated with McDuff. During the interrogation, Wally admitted to being involved in Colleen Reed's kidnapping. Deputy Sheriff Tim Steglick had been working tirelessly on the Reed case, and he learned about Wally through Texas Department of Corrections investigator John Moriarty, who had identified Wally as one of McDuff's known associates. At first, Wally was nervous and withheld information, but Steglick sensed he was holding back. Instead of pressuring him, Steglick decided to build trust. Visiting Wally several times at his home, the breakthrough came one evening when Wally called Steglick, saying he needed to talk urgently. Steglick picked him up, and as soon as Wally got into the car, he confessed, "I was with McDuff when he took that girl in Austin." Wally asked if he could say goodbye to his daughter, knowing he wouldn't be coming home for a long time. He then accompanied Steglick to the Bell County Sheriff's Department and told his story in detail. Wally's confession gave investigators crucial insight into the Reed kidnapping and helped them understand McDuff's methods and mindset. But by then McDuff had vanished. He had fled Texas and made his way to Kansas City, Missouri, where he found work at a refuse collection company under the alias Richard Fowler. McDuff believed he had successfully disappeared and could start over with a new identity, but his past was about to catch up with him in a way he never expected. On May 1, 1992, one of McDuff's co-workers, Gary Smithy, was watching the television show America's Most Wanted when he saw something shocking. The man featured on the program looked exactly like his new co-worker, Richard Fowler. Smithy discussed his suspicions with another co-worker, and together they decided to call the Kansas City Police Department. The police checked for any records under the name Richard Fowler, and discovered he had been arrested and fingerprinted for soliciting sex workers. When they compared those fingerprints to Kenneth McDuff's, they found a perfect match. Richard Fowler was, in fact, Kenneth McDuff. On May 4, 1992, A surveillance team of 6 officers arrested McDuff as he drove to work at the landfill south of Kansas City. The arresting team included Deputy U.S. Marshal Thomas Parnell McNamara Jr. and his brother, Deputy U.S. Marshal Mike McNamara, as well as Falls County Sheriff Larry Pap. Remarkably, these officers' fathers, Deputy U.S. Marshal Thomas Parnell McNamara Sr. and Falls County Sheriff Albert Brady Pamplin, had arrested McDuff for his first murders back in 1966. It was as if a team of lawmen had bookended McDuff's decades-long killing spree. McDuff's 26-year reign of terror was finally over. He was indicted on 1 count of capital murder for Melissa Northrup's death in McLennan County, Texas, on June 26, 1992. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and his long history of violence made it clear he would never be safe to release. In Texas, juries decide whether someone convicted of capital murder receives life imprisonment or the death penalty. Journalist Gary Cartwright summed up the public sentiment: "If there has ever been a good argument for the death penalty, it's Kenneth McDuff." On February 18, 1993, the jury sentenced McDuff to death in a special punishment hearing. As his appeals dragged on, McDuff made one last attempt to save his life. Just weeks before his scheduled execution, he revealed the location where he had buried Colleen Reed's body. Even this final act wasn't motivated by remorse or a desire to give Reed's family closure. Reed was simply a desperate attempt to delay his execution by providing information investigators wanted. Finally, on November 17, 1998, after years of appeals and delays, Kenneth McDuff's execution date arrived. At the Huntsville unit in Texas, McDuff was strapped to a gurney and given a lethal injection. After 32 years of murder, manipulation, and terror, Kenneth Allen McDuff was pronounced dead. McDuff holds the grim distinction of being the only man in Texas history to be sentenced to death for murder, paroled, arrested, and convicted of murder again, and sent back to death row. He was buried in the Captain Joe Bird Cemetery in Huntsville, Texas, also known as Peckerwood Hiller Cemetery, reserved for prisoners whose families do not claim their remains. His headstone bears only his execution date, November 17, 1998, an X to signify that the state executed him, and his death row number, 999055. There is no name, no birth date, no epitaph. It's a fitting end for a man who brought only pain and suffering to the world. The case of Kenneth McDuff exposed catastrophic failures in the American criminal justice system, failures that had deadly consequences for multiple families. While it's confirmed that McDuff killed at least 9 people, investigators believe the true number could be as high as 14. Some of his crimes may never be fully uncovered, leaving families without answers and justice forever out of reach. The most shocking part of this story is how preventable it was. McDuff should never have been released from prison in 1989. He had already murdered 3 teenagers in cold blood, sexually assaulted and strangled a 16-year-old girl, and even attempted to bribe a parole board member. Every possible warning sign was there, but the pressure to reduce prison overcrowding led to a policy of releasing 150 prisoners per day, and McDuff was swept up in this mass release. The consequences were devastating. The families of McDuff's post-1989 victims, Serafia Parker, Brenda Thompson, Virginia Moore, Cynthia Gonzalez, Colleen Reed, Valencia Joshua, and Melissa Northrup, all paid the ultimate price for the system's failure. Their loved ones died because a triple murderer was given a second chance he should never have received. Even more troubling is the fact that McDuff wasn't the only one. He was just one of 20 former death row inmates and one of 127 murderers released during this period. How many other dangerous criminals were set free? How many other families suffered because of these policies? The McDuff case led to significant reforms in Texas's parole system, but those changes came too late for his victims. It stands as a permanent reminder of what can happen when public safety is sacrificed for administrative convenience. As we reflect on the story of Kenneth McDuff, it's important to remember that this isn't just about a killer or a broken system. It's about the victims and their families. Robert Brand was only 17 when he was murdered, out on a date with his girlfriend, probably dreaming about the future. Mark Dunham was just 15, visiting his cousin, excited to spend time with family. He died trapped in a car trunk, begging for his life. Edna Louise Sullivan was 16. She should have grown up, graduated, maybe gone to college, gotten married, had children. Instead, she was sexually assaulted and murdered, her body discarded like trash. Serafia Parker, Brenda Thompson, Virginia Moore, Cynthia Gonzalez, Colleen Reed, Valencia Joshua, and Melissa Northrup all had their lives stolen by a man who should never have been free to hurt anyone again. These weren't just names in a case file, they were daughters, sisters, mothers, friends. They had hopes and dreams, and people who loved them. Their deaths were preventable tragedies that continue to haunt their families and communities to this day. Decades later, Kenneth McDuff died as he lived, thinking only of himself, showing no remorse for the pain he caused, and caring nothing for the lives he destroyed. But his victims deserve to be remembered for who they were, not just for how they died. The case of Kenneth McDuff forces us to confront difficult questions about justice, redemption, and public safety. Can someone who commits such horrific crimes ever truly be reformed? Should prison overcrowding ever justify releasing convicted murderers back into society? How many chances should someone get before we accept that they are simply too dangerous to be free? What do you think about this case? Should McDuff have ever been released from prison after murdering 3 teenagers? Could the system failures that led to his release happen again today? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this investigation informative, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth true crime documentaries. Your support helps us continue bringing you these important stories. Until next time, remember that behind every true crime case are real victims whose lives mattered, and real families who are still dealing with the aftermath of these tragedies. Thank you for watching.